Hey everyone, welcome back to Dollar Games, and as 2025 comes to an end, I don't know about you, but my year took so many unexpected turns, it slowly started to look like this. But that's not what I want to talk about in this video. I'm saving that chaos for maybe the next one. So today, I'm taking us back to August 29th of 2024 and the release of Visions of Mana. Because why not talk about a 2024 game at the end of 2025? I'm sure this will do great for my view count.
Well, I'll tell you my secret, sir. I lie to myself. Every morning when I wake up, I say everything's gonna be okay, but I'm lying.
Now this game was a huge deal, especially since the series hasn't had a true entry since the PS2 era with Dawn of Mana.
You say that?
Yeah, we don't actually say that name in here.
But let's not get into that game in this video as well, because if you know, you know. Being a huge Mana fan, I was extremely excited for this release, which is why I played it now, at the end of 2025. Please don't think too poorly of me. We're all guilty of buying something new just to feed the backlog disease. It's rampant out here in the woods. I can't be the only one, so go ahead and confess your shame in the comments. But only after you finish watching this video. But before we get into the review, I want to thank everyone for all the support since I started this channel. It's been a wild ride and it's amazing to see it grow, and I'm honestly shocked you all stick around to hear me yap about games. So here's a heartfelt thank you, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please think about it as I work towards building a bigger community. Anyways, let's get into the review. Let's just get this out of the way. This game is gorgeous, and the first thing that hits you about Visions of Mana is just how bright and inviting the world looks. It leans into this stylized, colorful aesthetic that combines itself with like a storybook style that Mana series is known for, but with way more detail and depth than the past entries. I honestly feel like it's like a true successor to Legend of Mana compared to what we got from the PS2 with Dawn of Mana. The style isn't the only thing that reminds me of Legend of Mana, but I'll get into that later. The environments feel handcrafted rather than overly realistic. Fields full of colors, forests that, have soft painterly glow, and towns that vary in style and size, which is another thing that reminds me of Legend of Mana. The locations are all varied and the characters living in them are as well. But honestly, it's the kind of game where you suddenly stop while running to your next objective just to pan the camera around and appreciate how pretty the sky is. And honestly, that sky deserves an award. The creature and the world design really leans into the Mana identity too. Familiar monsters return with new animations and personality, and the newer designs fit right in without feeling like they were lifted from a completely different game. The elemental areas especially stand out. Each one has its own visual theme that's strong enough to stick in your memory without overwhelming you with any particle effects. Everything has that soft fantasy charm, but it's polished enough that it looks modern without losing what makes Mana, Mana. Now, honestly, it's colorful, vibrant, and borderline whimsical in the best possible way. And then you've got the characters, which are honestly one of the game's biggest strengths. The art direction hits a sweet spot between classic anime styling and that warmer, more approachable aesthetic. Val's design automatically floods you with nostalgia for past Mana protagonists while still being his own person, and the rest of the party feels distinct both visually and in personality. Animations during battles and cutscenes give everyone a lot of character, little gestures, reactions, and expressions that make them feel like actual people instead of mannequins reading lines. The game tries so hard to make you like the cast, and it works. By the time you're halfway through the adventure, the characters feel like a crew you actually want to travel with. But it's definitely not perfect. Character animations during certain cutscenes can feel stiff compared to more expressive moments, especially when the camera hangs on a face that clearly wasn't meant to be stared at for that long. Nothing here breaks the experience, but every now and then you get reminded that this is a AA with heart project, not a massive blockbuster with unlimited polish. But that's totally fine to me because that is the kind of game I've been wanting more developers to create. A great fun experience wrapped in the budget of a AA development cycle so we can see more releases and more experimentation. If you've played a mana game before, you already know the usual setup. The mana tree's in trouble, something is throwing the world's mana out of balance, and you're the hero who ends up dealing with it. Usually by grabbing the mana sword and cleaning up everyone else's mess. But that's not exactly what you're getting here. In Visions of Mana, you do start the game knowing something's off in the world, but you aren't the hero. You're a product of the system that's been created over the years to handle the problems plaguing this land. It's an interesting place to be since it gives you a front row seat into how everyday people actually live under this tradition. The game kicks off in the world of KDL, where every few years certain people are chosen to take part in the sacred pilgrimage, meant to keep the world's mana in balance. It sounds honorable on the surface, but the catch is pretty brutal. The ones chosen for this ritual, who are called the Alms, are expected to give up their lives at the end of it. So right away, this is a dark story, and what really adds to that darkness is how excited everyone is to become an Alm. Adults, kids, entire communities are hoping one of them gets picked. When someone is selected, you don't see sorrow, you see celebration. This hit me hard because at first glance, the game lulls you in with its bright aesthetic and whimsical tone. And then, it slaps you in the face with emotions you weren't ready for.
Oh, wow! Wow!
Anyway, you start the game as Val, who has trained his entire life to be a soul guard. And what is a soul guard? Basically, he's a warrior appointed to accompany all the Alms and make sure that they reach the mana tree safely so they can sacrifice themselves for the good of the world. You'd think someone raised for that role would be brooding or weighed down, but nope. Val is incredibly chill. What adds to that chill is his childhood friend Hina being selected as the Alm of Fire. So what begins as protect your friend on her journey quickly shifts into something way more complicated once the two leave home. As the pilgrimage unfolds, Val and Hina travel across the various elemental regions, each with their own cultures and problems while gathering the other elemental alms to continue the journey together. The deeper they go, the more they realize how this tradition shapes the lives of everyone in KDL, and not always in the best ways. Val starts off with the simple goal of keeping Hina safe, but the pilgrimage forces him and the whole group to question whether this ritual is truly necessary or if everyone's just repeating it because no one has ever bothered to challenge it. By the time the party reaches the heart of their journey, the story shifts from complete the ritual to figure out what the world actually needs. Plus, of course, the typical JRPG bad guy who becomes increasingly demon-like as things escalate. The game isn't trying to reinvent storytelling or drop constant plot twists. It focuses more on the characters, the culture they encounter, and the idea that old traditions aren't automatically worth keeping just because they're old. But the story definitely isn't perfect either. Despite the darker themes, there's a lot of childish banter among the cast that doesn't always land. It's not non-stop, but with how much dialogue there is, it can feel like it. And not all the voice acting hits at the same level, which ties back to that AA charm I mentioned before. It doesn't ruin the experience, it's just one of those things you notice and eventually look past because the core journey is still worth it. The gameplay in Visions of Mana is easily one of its strongest elements. At its core, it's a fast-paced, real-time combat system that feels smooth without turning into pure button mashing. Each character plays differently enough that swapping between them keeps, battles fresh. And the game pushes you to do that often thanks to the elemental system. You're constantly thinking about which spirit you have equipped, which weaknesses you can take advantage of, and when to tag in another character to keep the flow going. It's not super complex, but it's snappy, stylish, and way more fun than I expected going in. The elemental vessels are where the combat really shines. As you unlock more of them, your movesets change dramatically. Suddenly you're gliding through the air, teleporting behind enemies, or freezing enemies with your attacks. I had a ton of fun collecting all the different elemental vessels and testing out how they would change each of my characters while trying to determine which one was, best for that specific character. This opens up a ton of depth thanks to their upgrade paths. letting you unlock moves that stick with your characters no matter what class they're in, along with class-specific abilities that give each role its own flavor. It's a fun system because you're not locked into one build. Now, sometimes you'll swap classes just to grab a specific move, then you'll go right back to your favorite setup. On top of that, the game has something called ability seeds, which add another layer of customization by giving you stat boosts, new moves, or even letting you channel abilities from defeated bosses later in the game. All of these pieces work together in a way that encourages actual strategy instead of just button mashing your way through the game, pushing you to experiment with classes you might have ignored and keeping combat systems from ever feeling stale. Outside of combat, the gameplay leans heavily into exploration. Each region has its own little puzzles, traversal mechanics tied to your vessels, and hidden areas that make running around genuinely fun. There are side quests that strike a balance of interesting world building and, fetch quests and hunt quests, so it wasn't super overwhelming. Plus, you can always skip them if you want to mainline the story and probably come back to it in New Game Plus, or not. The game has this breezy pacing where you're fighting, exploring, and upgrading in a nice rhythm that never gets overwhelming. When it comes to gameplay and mechanics, I honestly don't have many gripes. It very much feels like a mana game and includes the quality of life features you would expect from a modern release. Now, before I get to the end of the review, I wanted to bring up one last critique of the game. That said, there is one thing I'd like to call out, and I probably should have mentioned it earlier either in the presentation section or the story section, but since it's on my mind now, I'll bring it up here. I'm not a big fan of how the game transitions from scene to scene. It can feel pretty jarring at times and really slows down the sense of forward momentum. You see, in most games you'll hit a cutscene, follow along the story, and then naturally move on to the next part of the adventure. Here you often get these odd breaks between cutscenes where you're asked to walk to the next location, sometimes just a short distance away, only to trigger another cutscene. Personally, I think these moments should have flowed together as a single sequence instead of being broken up into brief movement sections. It doesn't ruin the experience by any means, but it definitely messes with the pacing and stood out as something I really wanted to call out. At the end of the day, Visions of Mana feels like a genuine love letter to the series, not just in its visuals or combat, but deep down in that sweet, sweet Mana heart. It understands what makes Mana special, with that blend of bright fantasy, a splash of sadness, and a sense of wonder that sticks with you. It's definitely not perfect, and it doesn't try to be some sort of massive genre-defining blockbuster. Instead, it delivers a focused, thoughtful, and genuinely fun experience that respects the legacy of the series while pushing it forward in meaningful ways. As a longtime Mana fan, this is the kind of game I've been waiting for years. Something that feels familiar without being just stuck in the past, and a very cool modern take without losing its soul. If you grew up with Mana, you'll absolutely love this, and if you're new to the series, it's honestly one of the best places to finally understand why people like me just won't shut up about it. So yeah, backlog jokes aside, I'm really glad I finally sat down with Visions of Mana. It reminded me why I fell in love with the series in the first place, and why sometimes waiting a little too long to play a game doesn't mean you missed the moment. So do yourself a favor and pick up Visions of Mana. And as always, if you loved my video, please like and subscribe as I try to get myself to 2,000 subscribers. Can't believe I'm saying that. So I'll catch you on the next one. Take care, everyone.